Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. You're about to see a conversation taped on the 30th of June, obviously seen later, with the Attorney General of New Jersey, Gurbir Grewal. First half of the conversation is about police reform and everything that means. It's important stuff, particularly given the death of George Floyd and everything that represents, the need to drastically change the way police function in our society, not just in New Jersey, but in the nation. The second half of the conversation with the Attorney General, we talk about COVID-19 and the role of the AG's office in dealing with a whole range of important issues, enforcing the governor's executive orders and edicts around COVID-19. So without further ado, my conversation with New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal. Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. We are honored to be joined by the Attorney General in the great state of New Jersey, Gurbir Grewal. Good to see you, Attorney General.
Great to see you, Steve, virtually.
Yes, last time you were with us, you were in the studio at NJTV. We had a compelling and, as always, important conversation. We're taping this program, I want to be clear with everyone, we're taping it on the 30th of June. So many things happening. Things will keep changing around us. But we're not the news. NJTV News has the news. Metro Focus has the news. Check them out for day-to-day. This is bigger picture, longer term discussion. Attorney General, when we talk about police reform, that embodies a lot of variables and factors. What does it mean to you?
Well, it means to me, in the context in which we find ourselves today, acknowledging that there are huge divides between law enforcement and the communities we serve. There are divides centuries in the making. There are divides rooted in mistrust between community and law enforcement. And to me, it means doing everything I can to bridge those divides by promoting a culture of professionalism, of transparency, and accountability in New Jersey law enforcement, which are the hallmarks of our best departments. And so I've implemented a whole host of policies with those three goals in mind. And if I could do that, I could bridge divides.
Sure, let's go through some of them specifically. There was an article literally just a few days ago posted on June 15th that you and the Office of the Attorney General, you are committed to an initiative in which the names of cops, police officers who commit, or excuse me, I shouldn't say commit because that's not the right word, who have records of extreme, serious disciplinary violations will be made public. A, why is that important? B, is it a reality or not yet?
Well, it's important, Steve, because there's a crisis in confidence in law enforcement, especially in this particular moment. People don't trust cops. People believe that cops do everything they can to protect those that might cross a line. They believe that there's this culture of silence in law enforcement. And so I think it's important to be transparent. It's important to be transparent about the accountability measures that we've put in place. And it's important to be forthright with the public that when we do have officers who cross the line, we hold them accountable. One way for us to do that is to make public major discipline. That means officers who've been fired, officers who've been demoted, officers who've received serious discipline, that we're not going to hide those records or those names any longer, that we're not going to protect the few to the detriment of the many. We're going to be transparent and put all of this out in the public on our websites for our departments locally. And in the case of the state police, I said I was going to go a step further and go back 20 years because I want to shine a light on all those troopers who do their jobs well. And that 0.5%, that's what it is, that 0.5% each year, we're not going to go to the mats to protect them and to keep from the public their offensive conduct and that information.
So it's interesting, with the state police, they fall under your jurisdiction, correct?
They do. So the 2,700 troopers come within the Department of Law and Public Safety.
However, municipal and county law enforcement professionals, police, they do not, correct?
They don't, but as AG, I have oversight authority over them. So the policies that I implement, the AG directives that I put forward to implement policing reform, they're binding on those officers.
So are you saying that in Essex County where I live, or the 21 counties around the state, or the 570, listen, every day it's a different number of municipalities, but it's 560, 70 plus, that they don't make those rules or policies for their police because they have individual police unions who have very strong feelings about what you're proposing. So I want to be sure that the public understands, Attorney General, who makes that call? The municipality, the county, or the state in the AG's office?
So under the way we're structured, the Criminal Justice Act, my constitutional authority, I have the authority to issue AG directives, which set the broad parameters of what the guidelines applicable to law enforcement agencies, what they should be. Now, each department might interpret those a certain way or might go a step beyond what I require, but I set the baseline requirements in this state for law enforcement training, accountability measures, transparency measures. And yes, you know, I do get pushback from the unions on this, and that's something that I'm dealing with right now.
So I want to be clear, by the way, to our producers who are in on this, when I say in on it, I shouldn't say that in New Jersey, they're listening on this call, they're going to make sure that we secure a very in-depth interview with a leader of the state PBA. And we're going to ask them about this, but I'm curious about this. If a union leader were to say, or union leaders were to say, Attorney General, we want to reform as well, but it is unfair to those police officers to have their records exposed publicly because these are complex cases. It isn't always black and white. And I don't mean by race, I mean the situation, a lot of gray areas. It's very unfair to those law enforcement professionals, their reputation, and their families, you say?
Well, I say we have protections in place. We're one of a handful of states that doesn't have any degree of transparency when it comes to policing records. You have.
What do you mean, like none?
Well, no, I mean, if you look at some other states, like Florida, 15 or so other states, now New York, they're releasing entire internal affairs files. And other states have been doing this for decades, and there's not been this same concern over officer safety. If we're talking about, Steve, a small percentage of officers, right? I give you the example of the state police. We have about 2,700 plus troopers. Each year, we discipline about 20 who fall into this category. About 4 or 5 of them are separated from employment. That's about less than 0.5%. So if we are truly serious about holding that small percentage accountable, then we shouldn't be pushing back on these types of transparency efforts. They should be joining me and saying, hey, perhaps we should do it this way or not that way. But when they're pushing back on protecting the 0.5%, this is about something more than about safety or something like that. They just don't want visibility into how things are handled. And I think that visibility is required more now than ever. They should spend more time listening rather than litigating. They should go out and listen to the community that is calling for this type of reform. They should spend time listening to individuals who are affected or been on the other side of bad law enforcement encounters. Listen, I will never know, right, what it's like to be a black man in America. I faced discrimination.
Obviously.
I faced discrimination throughout my life, but I will never know what it's like to be a black man in America. I did a town hall with the Attorney General of Illinois yesterday, Kwame Raoul, who talked to me about the first time a law enforcement officer pulled a gun on him at age 16. And then told me about the second time it happened at age 19. Talked to me about when his son had a similar experience. This is the Attorney General of Illinois. Those union heads who are pushing back, they will never know what it's like to be a black man in America. So they should spend more time listening to these types of experiences and coming up with thoughtful policies that address the underlying issues, the systemic and implicit biases that continue to haunt us today, rather than litigating against me in lawsuit after lawsuit, which I'll gladly fight. But I'm going to push forward for accountability and transparency.
You are listening to, watching a remote interview that we're doing with the Attorney General in New Jersey, Gurbir Grewal. I'm Steve Adubato. I want to make it clear, you'll see it up on our screen because we always disclose when we are taping. We're recording on the 30th of June. It will be seen after that. Events will change. The world will change around us. We'll talk about COVID in just a moment. But I want to follow up on something. As it relates to the horrific death of George Floyd, you said, quote, I was watching a murder on tape. Not only do I want you to elaborate on that, Attorney General, but what do you think would have happened if it hadn't been on tape?
Well, let me start with my experience of seeing that videotape for the first time, and then go to what would happen if it wasn't on videotape. Which
we don't know. I'm speculating, but I'm curious. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think like most Americans, most of your viewers, I am still reeling, as we are as a country, from the footage of that murder. I saw in that videotape a white police officer suffocate a black resident in broad daylight. 8 minutes, 46 seconds, while 3 other law enforcement officers stood by and did nothing, abdicated their responsibility, and were complicit in it. I'm angry by what I saw. I'm angry that they tarnished an entire profession. And I'm angry that no one jumped in to stop them, that those officers didn't do what they should do.
Why do you think they didn't? I'm sorry for interrupting. It's a little bit more difficult remotely. Why do you think those officers did nothing? Their argument was, or their attorney to date, and we're not here to litigate a case, it will be done in the courts where it belongs. The attorney who represents either all of those folks or those cops, or one of them at least, said they were following the directive of the superior officer, who in this case was the officer with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
He ironically was a training officer, and other officers that had been on maybe their first tour or their third tour and were new officers. I think part of this was a failure in training. Part of this was an issue that should have been addressed in the academy about duties and responsibilities. I mean, this is part of what we're trying to get right in New Jersey. We started this hard work back last year about improving our law enforcement training, about revising use of force. So I think that certainly is part of it, that you have this culture, and it's a hierarchical culture where you're afraid to speak up against a superior, but there are lines that should never be crossed, and we have to promote a culture where somebody will feel comfortable speaking up, and that's some of the things that we're trying to do in this state. Going to the other point, if this wasn't on video, we would not be in the moment in which we are right now. We would not be confronting the racial divides that we're confronting in this country. We would not be having these conversations about systemic and implicit biases, and it would be just another statistic. And there would be a criminal investigation, and we would not know what happened. That's why body cams, that's why dash cams, that's why these transparency measures that we're trying to put forward in this state about sharing that footage in a timely manner after a use of force incident is so important, because I think those are the steps that will help us build trust in this particular moment and moving into the future.
Last question before we go to a break. It's a question of the role of police officers, the role of law enforcement. And again, I like to say, just we're talking about municipal and county and state police, but in Washington, D.C., earlier, a month or so ago, as we're taping this program, federal troops were involved. I shouldn't say, it's interesting, federal troops, they're not federal police officers. There was something beyond that. They were federal law enforcement professionals. The president said at the time, when he was walking across the street to go through, I think it was Lafayette Park, if I'm wrong, our producers correct me on that, from the White House, and there were protesters who were protesting, at least from what I saw, largely in a peaceful fashion. They were moved out. So the president came across, walked across with the attorney general in our nation and held up that Bible in front of St. John's Church. Question. The president said, quote, "The job of the police is to dominate the streets." Am I taking that out of context?
Listen, I'm not taking policing advice from the president, and no police agency in this country should take policing advice from this president. We don't dominate people in this state, and that's why you saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of protests, including in Newark and other major cities, be handled in a different manner. They were peaceful. We had community involvement. We pulled back our law enforcement officers. We created, perimeter in the back, and we didn't have a visible police presence. And that's why we did things differently. And we also did the hard work of building trust with our communities across this state on those blue sky days before these protests. So we knew each other before these horrible incidents happened across the country. So when protests did happen, they resolved peacefully. And I think that's a testament to how we do things in New Jersey, and the president can take a lesson from us on how to do things at a national level.
Let me push back a little bit more on this. I know I'm over time, team, but I want to do this. In New Jersey, in Newark, we saw that. The mayor, by the way, check out our interview with Mayor Ras Barak on this, with Akila Sherrills, who's the head of the Newark Street Team. They were very much involved. They talked about the peaceful protest to disclose our son Nick, who was at Montclair High, and with a group of high school students. They had, I believe, 5,000 or 6,000 people in a very peaceful protest here in our hometown. The reason I raise all that is that wasn't the case across the nation, Attorney General. In Minneapolis and other places, businesses were looted. Violence took place. What is the role of the police when protests go in that direction?
Well, listen, to all those who are peacefully protesting in this state, I think it was important that we did what we did, which was all of us, law enforcement, political leaders, we told them that we saw them, that we heard them, that we shared their anger, and we shared their commitment to change. Those that crossed the line, those outside agitators, if you talk to the mayor, if you talk to Anthony Ambrose, if you talk to other major city chiefs where we did have problems, it was from non-residents who were coming in to cause trouble and create mayhem.
But that isn't always, not acceptable. Sorry for interrupting, not acceptable on any level. Correct, Attorney General?
None. No. To those, we have zero tolerance, and we've been holding those accountable. Those who are engaging in criminal conduct, engaging in violence. But to the thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of peaceful protesters without incident in this state, it's important. We told them that we heard them, and we are acting on what we heard, and we are listening to them. That's why I said earlier, we should listen, not litigate these things. The union should listen, not litigate. Listen to the community and what was being asked for, and move forward thoughtful policies in the state that bring communities together, that show that we care about creating a culture of accountability when it comes to law enforcement and bridging those centuries-old divides.
Attorney General, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the role of the Attorney General's office, your office, and all of the folks who work with you and for you as it relates to the crisis, the global pandemic, COVID-19. What is the role of the Attorney General's office?
And I guess the question should be, what isn't the role of the AG's office when it comes to the COVID-19 response? I think we touched this pandemic and the state's response in more ways than any other department of state. We have the state police from a public safety perspective. We have our Division of Criminal Justice from a law enforcement perspective to enforcing violations of orders and giving guidance to our county prosecutors. Then we have our Division of Law, which we provide guidance to every agency of state where there are lawyers, trying to give them advice on how to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, from employee relations to other issues that they might have on their enforcement priorities, like the DEP, for example, environmental protection. Then we advise the governor's office and give legal advice on all the executive orders. And then when people challenge them, we're the ones in court defending the constitutionality of those executive orders. So we touch it in a variety of ways, and I'm proud. I'm so extremely proud. Despite the fact that we're physically separated and socially distanced and working from home, our productivity in our department has not dipped at all. Our lawyers and public servants are doing exceptional work.
You know, it's interesting. I've seen video, you have, we all have. Well, often they go quote unquote viral, of people in New Jersey, across the nation, who are in department stores, who are wherever, they're inside, and they are told they need to wear a mask. And the rest, you know the story. Very often those people, and they're not just a few, and they also represent many others who say, it is my constitutional right to, quote, not wear a mask. Who is the government? Who is the Attorney General? Who is the governor? Who would the president or the Attorney General in the country? By the way, neither one is mandating that. Who is anyone in the government to tell me to wear a mask or not? I'm an American citizen, you say?
I say that, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. This is a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, I hope. And we're taking tough steps, and we're trying to do so in a constitutional manner, making sure that we are not crossing those lines and bounds that bind us, those constitutional rules. And for the most part, actually entirely, every challenge that people have brought in court to the constitutionality of the governor's orders, we've prevailed because we've been thoughtful about this, and the governor has extraordinary powers under state law and under the Constitution to protect public safety, and he's exercising that responsibly and I think effectively. As you see, compared to the rest of the country, knock on wood, we're doing pretty good here. And what I would say to them, those who don't want to abide by those rules, my wife's a physician. She worked at Valley Hospital, which in some ways in Bergen was ground zero. I saw her coming home with mask marks on her face, wearing scrubs, and telling me the horrific stories about when they were reaching capacity in that hospital. It required a collective effort of all of us doing our part to bring those numbers down and to address this pandemic and reduce the rate of death. And that was made possible by the measures that our governor took. And so, that's what I would say to those folks, that they're being selfish and that lives are at stake. And we did what was absolutely necessary in that particular moment.
Listening to the Attorney General, Gurbir Grewal, Steve Adubato, it is June 30th as we tape. I'm going to ask you a follow-up on this. You talked about your wife being a frontline medical professional, a physician. What impact has her experience had on you personally, not just professionally, but personally, and your family?
I think I get to see it from many different perspectives. I see it when I work hand in hand with the governor's office, the state police, when we're monitoring numbers and we're seeing where levels are at in the state about ventilator capacity, bed capacity, the rate of death, what's going on in our long-term care facilities. But then I see the human side of it. When my wife comes home, like I said, she was a physician who would go to work dressed in a professional outfit, but that all went by the wayside in the midst of this pandemic. It's back to scrubs. It's wearing a mask all the time. It's hearing just the horrific human toll that the virus has taken on people. And I think that put a different face to this pandemic, actually put a face on it for me. And then with 3 young kids at home, trying to play defense as soon as she walks in the house, don't hug me, don't touch me, let me go, take off my scrubs, let me go take a shower, wash my hair before I could even interact with you. That really brought it home in a way that made it real for me and more than abstract numbers.
To what degree do you believe that's influenced your thinking from a public policy point of view as a top level government official who's shoulder to shoulder with Governor Murphy on this? By the way, as we do this program, I want to be clear, things will change. In a couple of days, indoor dining was supposed to happen. Don't know what's going to happen moving forward, but as we tape on the 30th of June, the governor announced yesterday that's not going to happen. To what degree, when you're talking to the governor, advising the governor, engaging with the governor on this, have those experiences influenced your thinking as to how and whether and when we quote unquote open up?
I think all of those experiences have just really brought to bear the importance of data and numbers. And while those numbers might be abstract, they are the best indicator of where our decisions should be, what decisions we should be making. And I think those experiences have underscored how the governor is doing an incredible job here, looking at the numbers, balancing all the different all the different issues and costs and data points that impact his decisions, and really arriving at the best possible decision for the state. I think, it really has driven home to me how important it is to be careful and cautious as we move forward.
Yeah, I just need to follow up on this. You were the lead law enforcement official, not only in the state overall, but also in a case involving, and I want to get into the details because that gym was not the only gym. Mm-hmm. I'm not even going to mention the name. But there are other gym owners. There are other business professionals who are saying, Governor Murphy, your policies, your edicts, your executive orders, even though it's based on the 1947 Constitution, which allows you to do this, some in the legislature would disagree on certain ones. You're killing us. You're killing our business, you say?
I would say that they're not easy decisions, and that the governor has an enormous responsibility to all 9 million residents of this state, but also the rest of the country and our neighboring states. And these are not easy or popular decisions. And I would say to them that the governor is balancing the importance of pushing back this pandemic, reducing the rate of infection, and is proceeding in a cautious manner, taking into consideration all the other consequences to individual businesses, to the economy. I mean, these are real tough decisions, and the governor is doing an extraordinary job balancing all of this. But paramount is human life. And I think that's what's motivating him, and that's what I would tell them. This is not done to punish a particular gym or a particular business owner, but for the greater good. And that's what this is going to require from all of us, that we have to understand that this is more than us. This is going to impact the rest of the state, the rest of the country, and we all have to to feel the pain. And you know, no one takes any pleasure in this, but that's what it'll require. And we're seeing that in other states, Steve, that who took a different approach, who were more cavalier about this, who put profits over people. And didn't balance the data in the right way. And they're seeing the consequences of that type of decision making.
Attorney General, I want to thank you for being with us for this entire program. Professionally, we appreciate it as a broadcaster and you in your role, but also on a personal level, particularly with the work that your wife is doing. Wish her all the best, you and your 3 children, and stay safe and be as well as you can. And we look forward to talking to you down the road, and God willing, that will be in a studio at NJTV. Thank you, Attorney General.
Thanks, Steve.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. Thank you so much for joining us.